My parents missed my cancer treatment for my sister's wedding. Then she needed my help. Have you ever counted the empty chairs in a room and known the exact name that belonged in every single one of them? I did, on a Saturday in May, in the infusion ward at St. Brendan's. There was a row of chairs against the wall, the kind they put there for family, and mine were empty. Everyone. I was 41 years old with a port in my chest and a bag of clear poison dripping slowly into my arm. The poison the doctors were hoping would buy me a few more years. And 300 miles north of me, in a white tent strung with little lights, my mother was buttoning my sister into her wedding dress. They had all chosen the same weekend, my whole family, and they had not chosen me. I want to tell you I was furious. The truth is quieter than that. I just kept counting the chairs, over and over, because counting was a thing my hands could do, and understanding was not. My name is Claire. And this is the story I have never once told out loud. The one about the year my family showed me exactly where I stood, and the year, a long time later, when they came back and needed me to forget it. Hello, everyone. Pull up a chair and sit with me a while. Tonight we're going to spend some time with Claire. 41 when this begins, a woman who kept the books for a small dental office and kept half the town's secrets without ever being asked. Her family missed the worst year of her life for a party, and they did it smiling. Years later, they came back to her door, and what they needed, only she could give. If you're new here, please subscribe. It helps the channel grow and reach more people. Now let's get started. The phone rang on a Tuesday evening in my garden, and I almost didn't go in for it. I'm 54 now. I have a small house at the end of a street that doesn't go anywhere, which is exactly why I bought it, and a garden in the back that I have spent 13 years teaching to forgive the soil. That evening, I was on my knees in the dirt, thinning out the carrots, and the phone rang inside on the kitchen wall, the way it does, patient and stupid, and I thought about letting it go to the machine. I went in. I wiped my hands on my jeans and picked it up, and there was a pause on the line. The kind of pause that means whoever is calling has rehearsed the first sentence and lost it. Then my mother said my name. Claire. Just that, the way she used to say it across a grocery store when I'd wandered too far down the wrong aisle. I hadn't heard her voice on my own phone in close to 4 years. Claire, it's about Vanessa. I didn't say anything. I have learned, over a long life, that you can find out almost everything you need to know about a person by what they do with a silence. And I wanted to find out what my mother would do with this one. She filled it, the way she always did, with words. She's sick, honey. She's very sick. We need to talk about it, all of us, as a family. As a family. I stood there with the dial tone of my own pulse in my ears, and I looked at the drawer next to the stove where I keep a cookie tin I have not opened in front of another living soul, and I told her I would call her back. I did not call her back. Not for 2 days. I needed those 2 days to decide who I was going to be, because I already knew, the way you know weather, that whatever Vanessa needed was going to be large, and that I was going to be the one standing closest to it. Let me take you back, because none of this makes sense without the before. I was the older one by 4 years. In a family, that means something gets decided about you early, before you have any say in it. The decision about me was that I was reliable. Claire is reliable. Claire is fine. You could set me on a shelf and come back in a decade and find me right where you left me, dusted and waiting, and so nobody felt much need to come back. Vanessa was the other thing. Vanessa was bright the way a struck match is bright, sudden and warm, and impossible not to watch. She cried beautifully and laughed louder and forgot things in a way people found charming. When she was 9, she knocked a whole tray of my mother's canning off the counter. Every jar, a year's worth of tomatoes across the kitchen floor in a red ruin, and my mother laughed and called her a hurricane, and they cleaned it up together giggling. When I was 11, I dropped 1 jar, 1, and my mother sighed and said, Claire, You have to be more careful. You're the one who's supposed to be careful. I tell you that not because it is the worst thing. It is the smallest thing. I tell you because that was the whole shape of it, the shape that took 30 years to finish drawing. You should know what my life actually looked like by the time I was 40, because it matters to what they took. It was a small life, and I am not ashamed of the word. I'd kept the books for the same dental practice for 19 years, a little 3-chair office on the second floor above a pharmacy, and I was good at it. The way you are good at something you've quietly perfected while nobody watches. I knew which patients paid late and which ones were too proud to say they couldn't pay at all, and I covered for the second kind in ways the dentist never noticed. I had a friend there, Joan, who ran the front desk and had a laugh you could hear through a closed door. And on Fridays, we'd split a sandwich and complain about the insurance companies like two women at war. I had my house, and I was learning the garden, and I had a few good people. It was not a life that photographed well. There was no white tent in it, no script with gold edges. But it was mine, and I had built every inch of it myself, brick by ordinary brick, with no one's hand over mine on the ladle. And I want you to hold that picture, because that is the woman the phone calls were about to find. And I want to be fair to my mother, because the easy version of this story is a cruel woman, and my mother was not cruel. I have a memory of her from before any of it, standing at that same counter on an August afternoon teaching me to seal jars. The kitchen was 100 degrees and smelled of vinegar and tomato skin, and she had her sleeves pushed up and a smear of red on her cheek, and she was singing something off the radio, badly, and she put her hand over my hand on the ladle and said, "Slow, Claire, slow, you can't rush it or the seal won't hold." For years, that was my favorite memory of her. After everything, I still couldn't make myself throw it away. That is the part nobody warns you about, that the love was real, which is precisely what made the rest of it land the way it did. The 2 envelopes came the same week. I have thought about that a great deal, how they arrived almost together, like the universe had a sense of structure. The first was cream-colored, heavy paper, gold along the edges, my sister's name and her fiancé's name in a script so fancy you had to work to read it. A wedding. The date was a Saturday in May. The second envelope was thin and white and had the name of the Regional Cancer Center in the corner, and inside it was a schedule, a calendar of dates, the dates they wanted me to come in and let them try to save my life. One of those dates was that same Saturday in May. I found out I was sick on a Wednesday alone, in a beige room with a doctor who was kind and tired. Breast cancer, the aggressive kind, the kind where they don't say the comforting numbers right away. I drove home and I sat in my car in the driveway for an hour, and then I went in and I called my mother. Because that is what you do. That is the oldest reflex there is. You are 41, and you have a port about to be put in your chest, and you call your mother. She was lovely on the phone. She cried. She said all the right things. "Oh, Claire. Oh, honey, we're going to get you through this." And I believed her, because I wanted to, because the canning kitchen was still in me somewhere. And then, within the same week, the calendars collided, and I got to watch my family solve the problem. It was not a dramatic thing. That is what I most want you to understand. There was no screaming, no door slammed, no villain twirling anything. There was a phone call where my mother said in a gentle, reasonable voice, "Now your first treatment is that Saturday, but the chemo will still be there next week, Claire. The wedding won't." She said it the way you'd correct a child's arithmetic. The chemo will still be there, as if it were a coat I could pick up later from a lost and found. I said the date wasn't really mine to move, that it was scheduled around the surgery and the blood work and the protocol. And there was a small pause, and my mother said, "We'll celebrate your recovery after, all of us. We'll make it a whole thing. But this is Vanessa's day, and you wouldn't want to be the reason it's overshadowed." The reason it's overshadowed. I have turned that sentence over for 13 years. She had found a way to make my staying alive into a kind of bad manners. There was one more thing she asked of me in that same week, and it is the one that still catches in me sideways when I'm not expecting it. She asked me very softly as a favor not to tell people yet, not to make it known. Vanessa was so stressed about the wedding, she said, so close to the edge with the planning, and it wouldn't be fair to put this on her right before her big day. It would be all anyone talked about, and Vanessa would feel guilty, and you don't want your sister feeling guilty at her own wedding, do you, Claire? So I was to carry the heaviest news of my life quietly, tucked under my coat, so that it wouldn't smudge a celebration I wasn't going to. I agreed. That's the thing I can't quite explain to people who didn't grow up in it. That I agreed, that some trained and obedient muscle in me said, of course, and meant it. And only years later did I understand that I had been asked to apologize for the inconvenience of nearly dying. I told Joan eventually, because Joan saw my face one Friday and would not let me lie to her. But I told my own family nothing further. I let them keep the quiet they'd asked for. I have gotten better since at noticing the moment someone asks me to make myself smaller for their comfort. I did not notice it then. I just made myself smaller. Here is the part I am not proud of, and I am going to tell you anyway, because I promised myself if I ever told this, I would tell it straight. There was a night, about a week before the wedding, when I lay awake and I did not pray to get better. I prayed for it to rain. I prayed for a real storm, the kind that floods the roads and grounds the cars so that they couldn't go, so that for one weekend the world would force them to sit in the same room as my illness and not look away. I wanted them to feel trapped by me the way I felt trapped by my own body. It didn't rain. The Saturday came up blue and perfect, the kind of day weddings put in the brochure. I have never entirely forgiven the weather. There were smaller things, before and around it, the way there always are. My mother canceled a visit she'd promised. She was going to come help me after the surgery, because Vanessa needed her at a dress fitting, and a fitting, it turns out, cannot be moved while a sister can. There was the matter of the money. Months earlier, before any of us knew, I'd promised to help with the wedding, and now, sick and out of work, and burning through what I had on parking and prescriptions, I got a soft little call asking if I was still good for my part, because the deposits were due, and Vanessa would be so disappointed. I paid it. I want you to know I paid it. I sat in my kitchen with my hair already starting to come out in the shower drain, and I wrote a check toward a party I would not be invited to attend in any way that mattered. And the day itself, the first infusion, they tell you to bring someone, for the long ones, someone to drive you home after, because the drugs leave you wrung out and strange. I told the nurse my person was coming. I had told myself my person was coming. Nobody came. I sat in a vinyl recliner under a fluorescent hum for 4 hours with a magazine I never opened, and at some point in the afternoon, my phone buzzed, and it was a text from Vanessa, from 300 miles away, and it was a single red heart. No words. A heart emoji, sent from the morning of her own wedding, which I suppose, in her mind, was a generous thing to spare from her busy day. That was the Saturday I counted the chairs. The nurse's name was Marcia. I'll tell you about Marcia, because she matters more to the end of this than anyone with my blood. She was a big, slow-moving woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she had clearly worked that floor long enough to read a room of people. And somewhere in the second hour, she pulled the wheeled stool over and sat down next to my chair, on the side where the empty family chairs were, and she didn't say anything sentimental. She just asked me what I did for work, and when I told her I kept books for a dentist, she said, "Good, then you can help me. This billing system is going to put me in the ground," and she got me arguing with her about software for 20 minutes. She sat with me, on and off, the whole afternoon. She was being paid to manage my drip. She was not being paid to take the empty chair. She took it anyway. When it was over, she walked me out and she saw there was no car waiting, and she didn't make me explain. She just said, "Is there someone at home?" And I said no, and she stood there a second, and then she said something I have kept. She said, "You'd be amazed how many people get left at exactly the moment they thought love was guaranteed. It's not a thing wrong with you, it's a thing wrong with them, and it was always there. You just hadn't needed to see it yet." Then she called me a car service on the company's account and told me not to argue with her about that, too. That night, the wedding night, though I didn't let myself think of it in those words, I got home wrung out and nauseous and strange, the way they warn you, and I lay on top of my own covers with the lights off because the light hurt, and somewhere a few 100 miles away there was dancing. I could see it without trying. The string lights, the toasts, my mother in a blue dress she'd have agonized over, my father with a glass he didn't really want, raising it anyway, Vanessa spinning. I lay there, and I did the thing you are not supposed to admit to. I imagined being missed. I imagined someone at a table leaning to the empty place where I might have sat and saying, "Where's Claire? Isn't Claire coming?" and someone else lowering their voice to explain, and a small cloud passing over the party. I wanted to be a cloud. That was as much revenge as I had the strength for that night, the fantasy of being a faint shadow over other people's happiness, and even that I couldn't hold on to, because the truth underneath it was simpler and worse, that nobody at that party was looking at an empty chair at all. The chairs were full. There was no place set for me to be missing from. I fell asleep eventually in my clothes, and in the morning I made myself toast I couldn't taste, and I started, without deciding to, the long, quiet work of becoming a person who did not expect to be chosen. I want to skip ahead now, because the months after blur, the way illness blurs. I did the treatment. I did all of it, alone in the practical sense and not alone in the way that counts, because Marcia was there for the ones that came after, and my coworker Joan started showing up with soup she pretended she'd made too much of, and the woman next door took my bins out every week and never once asked why I looked the way I looked. The world, it turns out, is full of people who are not your family, who will quietly take the chair. The wedding photos went up online while I was at my sickest. My mother was tagged in them, glowing, holding Vanessa's bouquet for a picture. There was a big family one, all of them on the lawn in their good clothes. My father with his hand on Vanessa's shoulder, everyone squinting and laughing. I am not in it. There is no gap where I should be, no empty space, nothing for the eye to catch. The frame simply closed over the place I would have stood, smooth, like water. That was somehow worse than being cut out. I had never been there to cut. After I was well, and I did get well, I want you to have that, the cancer went and it has stayed gone. There was no big reckoning. They didn't make the whole thing they'd promised, the celebration of my recovery. It got mentioned once or twice and then it evaporated, the way things do that were only ever said to close a conversation. My mother would call now and then, lighter and lighter, as if the volume of the whole year could be turned down by simply talking about other things. And one evening she left me a voicemail. I saw her name come up and I let it go to the machine, and the little light blinked for 3 weeks, and one day I deleted it without listening. I never heard what was on it. I have wondered since. Maybe it was the apology. Maybe it was a question about a casserole dish. I will never know, and I have made a strange peace with never knowing, because by then I had understood something it took me the whole year to learn. I had been waiting my entire life to be chosen, and the choosing was never going to come. Not because I hadn't earned it. You cannot earn it, that's the trick of it. But because some families decide who you are when you're small, and then they spend the rest of your life refusing to see anything that doesn't match the sketch. To them, I was the reliable one. The reliable one does not get rescued. The reliable one is the shelf you rest the rescuing on. So I stopped. Not in anger, I just stopped reaching toward a hand that was never going to close around mine, and the quiet that came after was not the worst thing I have ever felt. It was, if I'm honest, a kind of relief. I built my small life at the end of the street that goes nowhere. I learned the garden. The years between are not a dramatic stretch, and I won't pretend they were. We did the holidays, most of them, because in a family like mine, you keep doing the holidays long after the reason for them has quietly left the building. I'd drive up for Christmas and sit in the good room with a plate on my knees and watch my mother orbit Vanessa and Vanessa's new house and Vanessa's new husband, Mark, a pleasant man with a firm handshake who I could already tell would not be in the room when things got hard, and was right about because he wasn't. I was the aunt who brought a sensible gift and left before the roads got dark. Once, only once, at a Thanksgiving when the others were in the kitchen, Vanessa sat down next to me on the couch and was quiet for a while, and then she said, "You were really sick, weren't you? Back then. Really sick." And I said yes. And she opened her mouth like there was a whole sentence behind it, and then my mother called her name from the kitchen to come taste something, and she got up and the sentence never came. I have thought about that unfinished sentence almost as often as I've thought about my mother's deleted voicemail. Two things that were never said, that I have had to learn to live beside without ever knowing their shape. Years went by like that, gentle and uneventful, holidays kept at a polite distance, and I thought the story was over. I thought the story was just going to be that nothing happened, which is how most injustices end in real life. Not with a verdict, just with a slow fade and a person learning to live in the after. And then the phone rang in my garden, and my mother said it was about Vanessa. Here is what I learned in those 2 days before I called back. Vanessa had leukemia, the serious kind, the kind that has a clock in it. The treatment she needed after the chemo did what it could was a bone marrow transplant, and a transplant needs a donor, and a donor needs to match, and matching is mostly a family affair. Siblings are the best odds. They had tested everyone. My parents weren't matches. That's common. Parents rarely are. They had tested cousins. They had put Vanessa in a registry of strangers, and the strangers so far had come up empty. And then they had tested me. They must have used a cheek swab kit mailed to my house months back that I'd half forgotten signing for. I'd done it numbly, the way you sign for things, not letting myself think about what it might ask of me later. And the result had come back. And I was a match. Not a partial one, a near-perfect one. Out of the whole world, the person whose marrow could save my sister's life was the woman they'd left counting chairs in an infusion ward 13 years before. My father called me himself, the night before I was going to call my mother back. That had never happened in my adult life. My father is a kind, weak man who has spent 40 years letting my mother be the one who speaks. The way some men let their wives carry the parts of life that require a spine. But he called me, alone, late, and I could hear that he'd waited until she was asleep. He didn't make a speech. He said, "Claire." And then he was quiet for a long time, and I heard him breathing. And finally he said, "I should have driven down. That Saturday. I had the keys in my hand, and I put them back in the bowl, and I have thought about that bowl every day since." That was all. He didn't ask me for anything. I think it was the first honest thing my father had said to me in 30 years, and it cost him so much I could hear it costing him, and I sat in my dark kitchen and didn't trust my own voice enough to answer him. My mother came to the house after that. Both of them did the next afternoon before I'd given anyone an answer. I heard the car, and I knew it before I looked, because almost no cars come down a street that goes nowhere. They stood on my step, the two of them, smaller than the people in my memory, my mother holding her purse in front of her with both hands like a girl at a recital. And there it was, the thing I had stopped letting myself want. My family at my door, needing in. 13 years too late and for the wrong reason. But there. She'd brought a dish, covered in foil. She always brought a dish. I think it's the only way she knows to walk towards someone, and I have decided to find that sad rather than insulting, because the alternative is to carry it, and I have carried enough. I let them in. We sat in my front room, the one I keep nice, and my mother did most of the talking, and the talking was all about Vanessa. Vanessa's counts, Vanessa's doctors, the window the doctors had given, how there wasn't much time. Not once in the whole visit did she say the word sorry or the word chemo or the year that was sitting in the room with us like a fourth person nobody would look at. She had come to ask me to save my sister's life, and she had not found in the drive down a way to mention that she'd missed the saving of mine. I watched her hands on that purse, and I understood that she genuinely could not see it. The year was not a thing she was hiding from me. It was a thing she had filed away as handled, as old business, as a sadness we'd all moved past, and the not seeing was so total that being angry at it felt like being angry at the weather that hadn't rained. When they left, the dish stayed on my counter. I never ate it. I never threw it out either. For a long time, it just sat there, going to the back of the fridge, a small foil monument to the only language my mother has. I'm going to tell you about the night I decided because that's the real climax, and it didn't happen in a hospital. It happened in my kitchen, with the cookie tin open on the table in front of me. I keep 2 things in that tin. I took them out and set them side by side under the light. The first is a thin paper hospital bracelet, my own, from that first Saturday. They snap it on you, and I'd worked it off whole later and kept it, and on it is my name and a date. That date. The second is the wedding invitation, cream and gold, that I never sent back. I don't fully know why I kept them together. I think because they were the 2 things that arrived the same week and told me the truth, and some part of me needed the truth, kept somewhere I could find it again, in case I ever started to doubt it. And I'll be honest with you one more time because I said I would. Sitting there, I let myself imagine saying no. I imagined it in detail. I imagined my mother having to learn the thing I'd had to learn, that you can need a person desperately and still not be entitled to them, that love is not a debt that gets called in when it's convenient. I imagined them feeling, for one season, what it is to count the chairs. I sat with that for a long time, and I am not going to pretend it wasn't sweet, because it was. And anyone who tells you they'd feel nothing is lying to you or to themselves. But here's the thing about being the reliable one. Somewhere underneath the way they'd weaponized it, it was also just true. I am the person who takes the chair. Marcia took it for me when she didn't have to, and the next-door neighbor took it, and Joan took it, and I had spent 13 years quietly building a whole life out of being the kind of person who shows up, precisely because I knew all the way to the bone what the other thing felt like. To say no would not have made me even with them. It would have made me one of them. And I had worked too hard and bled too quietly to become my mother in the one moment it would have felt best to. So I called, and I said I would do it. And I said one other thing, the only condition I ever set, and I said it to my mother directly, with no heat in my voice at all, because I had learned a long time ago that the things you say without heat are the ones that stay said. I told her, I'm doing this for Vanessa, not for the family. There is no family in this for me. I'm doing it because I am the one who comes when someone is dying, and I always was. You just never needed to find out until now. My mother started to argue with the word family, started to say it wasn't like that I'd always been. And I let her run out of the sentence, and then I said gently, that's the part you should sit with, that you can't finish it. And I hung up before she could. The donation itself is not a movie. I'll tell you that too, because the channel you're listening to me on is not in the business of pretending. It is needles and forms, and a long morning under a different fluorescent hum, in a different chair, with the marrow drawn and bagged and carried away by a stranger in scrubs, to be put into my sister's body. It doesn't hurt the way you'd think, and it doesn't heal anything the way you'd hope. There was no swell of music. There was a nurse asking me if I wanted apple or orange juice afterward, but there was one moment they let me see Vanessa, after when she was strong enough. She was in an infusion ward, a different hospital, a different year, but they are all the same room, those rooms, the same vinyl recliners, and the same wall of chairs for family, and there was an empty chair pulled up beside hers. And I crossed the room and I sat down in it, the chair on the family side, the one nobody had taken from me. My sister looked at me with her bald head and her enormous frightened eyes, the brightness all burned down to something small and human, and she said, "You came." 2 words. The same 2 words, I realized, that I would have given anything to say myself 13 years before, to anyone at all. I didn't make her a speech. I didn't forgive her exactly, and I didn't not. I just took her hand, the way Marcia had pulled a stool to my side and started in about billing software, and I asked her if the food was as bad here as everywhere, and I sat with her while the bag dripped. My father stood in the doorway and cried without making a sound. My mother could not be in the room. I think the chair was more than she could look at, and I have decided that her not being able to look at it is the closest thing to an apology I am ever going to get, and that it will have to be enough, because waiting for the other kind is the thing that nearly cost me my own life back. Vanessa lived. I'll give you that plainly. The transplant took, and she is here, and she has a daughter now who she swears looks like me, which I think is her way of saying a thing she doesn't have the words for. We are not healed, she and I. I want to be honest about that most of all, because the lie that families snap back together when someone does something big is a lie that has hurt a lot of people who believed it. We are careful with each other now. She calls on my birthday, and she means it, and there is a thin, nervous quality to her voice every time, like a woman holding a jar she knows she once dropped. My mother and I speak rarely and lightly, and across a distance that no marrow could close, because the distance was never about the marrow. I still have the cookie tin. The bracelet and the invitation are still in it, side by side. I thought, after the donation, that I might finally throw them out, that the story was finished and I could let the proof go. I took the tin down one evening last fall and I held it for a while, the way my mother once held a ladle over my hand, and then I put it back in the drawer, not out of bitterness, just because some things are true. And I have learned that you don't have to display the truth on the wall, but you also don't have to pretend you never knew it. It's evening now, the same as the evening it started. I've been out in the garden, thinning the carrots, and the light is going gold and low across the beds I taught to grow. The phone is quiet on the kitchen wall. In a little while, I'll go in and wash the dirt off my hands and make a cup of tea, and the house will be quiet. The good kind of quiet, the kind I chose. There's a chair on my back step where I like to sit and watch the dark come down over the things I planted. It's the only chair out there. I only ever needed the one.